All right, this is the Crayola marker project. We are just going to be using a black Crayola marker. You do get to take or make a choice between a washable Crayola and just a regular Crayola. Now the difference here is that they do kind of turn out to make different colors. So depending on what you're looking for, you'll want to make sure that you're paying attention to which one makes a specific color. And then also we're going to be using texture elements. So you'll have your choice of using rubbing alcohol and salt. And those two things also kind of help to create a texture, and it creates that color. So we are going to be using a paper, called Bristol paper. It's a vellum surface, so when you get this paper, it's going to feel very, very thick. It's also going to feel very smooth. So Bristol paper. And the first step of this project is getting a wood board, and you'll get your piece of paper. Once you have these two things, you are going to grab a roll of tape, and you're going to create a border for your paper, and you'll want that tape to stick onto the board. The purpose of this, if you don't tape it down, the paper will eventually start to want to roll as the paper gets liquid and the marker on it. So this board helps to make it flat and it's easier to work with. So when you get your paper, you're going to want to figure out which direction it fits best onto your board. Okay, this direction, it kind of comes off one side just a little bit. So I noticed that when I placed it here, that there was more space. So I'm going to put the paper like this onto the board. Next, we'll grab our tape. And when you're doing the tape, you don't want to just rip pieces by themselves. So an example, please don't just rip some tape, take it off, and then figure out if it's enough. Okay, I got lucky. That was actually enough tape. But if I was taping this side, it would not be enough. You want to get one whole section of tape to fill that side. So what that's going to look like is you'll grab your tape roll, measure it out, okay, put the tape to the edge of your paper. And you want that tape to go over both sides of the paper so it will fit onto the board. What's also important is that you're not putting the whole piece of tape onto the paper. Oftentimes students do that and it doesn't have anything to stick to. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create a tiny and thin little border. So take your tape, kind of place it over the top, and you can actually see through the kind of cream colored tape to see where your paper is. So I'll take that, measure it out, looks like enough. At this point, then you can rip it and then place it down onto your paper. And then make sure that you press it down really well. Use your nail to create a nice crease. And then put that extra tape onto the back side of the board. Okay, once you've done that, then we will flip the board, put the tape here. So again, measure it out, and you can rip the tape, and then make sure you're trying to get a nice, tiny, small border. Press it down really well with your nail, flip it over, and make sure that tape is onto the other side of the board. And then we just have these two other sides. So measure, crease that really well. If there's extra tape, just flip it to the other side of the board. Once you finish that, double check that your tape is actually on the paper. Take your nail or a ruler and crease that edge. If the tape is not on that paper well, what's going to happen is when you start adding the water onto the paper, it might seep underneath that tape. and then it's just going to lift up. So that looks good. The next step is you're going to create your drawing. So you'll need a pencil. You want to draw really, really light. Do not draw dark because the marker, it does start to fade and you don't want to see all your pencil lines. So for this demo, I'm going to pick something very, very simple. The drawing is not going to be extremely advanced. I think I am just going to pick a heart. Now I'm going to choose to put it in the center of the page. It would not be the best option to draw my heart on one side. It wouldn't be balanced and there's too much empty space over on this side. Now, this is really light, so we'll see if you can see it. Okay, this is just a heart. I am going to kind of modify it a little bit, and I want to have some drips kind of coming out of different areas of the heart. Okay, so there we go. It's very, very light. You can go in if you need, go over it to lighten up your pencil lines. Once you've done this, figure out which marker you're going to use. Personally, I have decided that I like the non-washable Crayola marker. I like the colors. I also like the way that it lifts and comes off of the paper more than the washable. I have an example. It's not completely dry yet, but you can see kind of what the difference here is with the washable and non-washable. The washable usually creates a lot more pink color, and sometimes there's a really kind of a teal or turquoise looking color. The non-washable seems to be a lot darker. You will get a little bit of pinks, but usually it seems to be more on a blue side. You can even see that there's almost a little bit of like a gold effect. Now what makes this is the texture elements, so the salt and the rubbing alcohol. The rubbing alcohol is kind of these sections where it's kind of pushed the color away, and then the salt is where more of the color has appeared. So I'm going to take my non-washable Crayola, and first I'm going to outline the drawing that I have. Now you don't have to outline every part of your drawing. If I leave some of it just that pencil line, with my paintbrush I can move the water that has some of the marker in it into that area, so it will be a little bit lighter. The more marker you put down onto your paper, the darker the color is going to be, and sometimes it's not the best. So as you guys have some time to practice, you want to figure out what techniques work and what doesn't work. So I'm going to leave this side open and then just move the color. Now this side I want to be darker, so I'm going to come in with my marker and fill in more of that section with this marker. Okay, so the more that you put into some areas, the darker that those sections will be. Now you gotta add basically the amount of marker that you want in the first place. Once I start adding water, I can't go back and outline things with a marker because it either destroys the marker or basically it just doesn't work. So I feel that I'm going to stick with this. Now you want to have your texture elements ready to go. So I'm going to be using salt. You guys will have containers that the salt is in. So for me, I'm just gonna take some out and I'm going to put it on this paper towel. And then the rubbing alcohol, I just have a little container full of. Now you can either dip your fingers into that container and kind of spray it onto the piece, or you can use one of these tools. I just forgot what it's called. You'll know. Quiz. What is this called? Okay. So you now need to start figuring out what type of paintbrush you're going to use. Using something this small in comparison to this bigger one, it's going to be a lot harder to work with this. You have to work really fast with this project. You really don't have time to go slow. So have a plan and be ready to work quick. So I'm going to use this bigger brush. A smaller brush would be good for tiny details. So we'll take this. Now I'm going to start putting a lot of water onto my paper. And I am going to lightly scrub at the marker that's there on the paper. You have to add a lot of water. If you don't add a lot of water, your project will not work. Adding lots of water, what that does is it lifts all the marker that is on the paper. And so if you don't add enough, it doesn't lift that marker up. So keep scrubbing at it, keep adding water to that same section. Hurry and try that off. There we go. Okay, kind of quickly come down into this area. Put a little bit of water in there. Now, I don't want this part to dry out, so really quick, I'm going to add a little bit of my texture elements. So I'm going to use some salt. So I'll take a little bit of salt, sprinkle it over, and then keep going. Okay, keep scrubbing at those lines that I haven't gotten to yet. You have to scrub over all the lines that you have drawn down onto your page. Now for fun, I'm going to add a little bit of this rubbing alcohol. Dip my finger in, okay, and it gets rid, basically, of some of that marker that's down. They don't really get along. Okay, especially if I grab this really quick. Put it down into this section, see if it wants to work. You can see that it kind of pushes it away. All right, gotta keep moving. So now it's going to start kind of moving that color. Change the direction of your board if you need to. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit more salt. Okay, and then keep going. Okay, now I'm filling in that empty spot. Scrub at the marker. Okay, there we go. So now I'll add a little bit more salt to this side. And maybe possibly a little bit more of the rubbing alcohol. Oh, that made it spill. Oh well. We'll kind of fix it. There we go. Now if you have an area that's dripping a lot, like this area, take a little bit of your paper towel. Okay, and then just set it in that spot for a second and it will help to lift it up. Okay, and the same thing if you have a lot of liquid here and you're worried about it moving. Okay, take a corner of your paper towel and put it into that section. You can also dry off your paintbrush, set it into that area, and it will slowly kind of pick up that liquid and kind of dry it up a little bit.